According to Francisco, Alvarez Imam Mahfouz attacked the Christian Abyssinians when they were physically weak during Lent, and was able to carry off no less than 19,000 Abyssinians, to which he immediately sold off to his friends in Arabia. Ludovico di Varthema, who visited Zela in 1503, wrote that the port was a place of immense traffic, especially for slaves. He declares, "Here are sold a very great number of slaves, which are the people of Prester John, Ethiopia, whom the Moors take in battle, and from this place they are carried into Persia, Arabia Felix, and to Mecca, Cairo, and into India." Zela seems to have been the southernmost port frequented by Arab merchants, whose chief center for these regions, however, was Aden, where the commercial and also the climatic conditions were more favorable. Through Zela, and to a lesser degree Berbera, passed the main stream of slaves from the Ethiopian hinterland. The conquests of Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi resulted in large numbers of Habesha peoples enslaved. He is said to have captured hordes of Christians, which resulted in every soldier of his army having no less than 200 slaves each, and according to a local chronicle, every man in Harar had at least 3 Habesha slaves. Many of the Christian nobility were sold into slavery, and their wives turned into concubines for the Muslims. According to Richard Pankhurst, almost all of the Ethiopians captured by Imam Ahmad were subsequently sold to foreign merchants in exchange for firearms and cannons. A Portuguese Jesuit reported that Adal managed to sell thousands of Abyssinian slaves to traders from across the sea, to Arabs, Turks, to Persians, and to Indians. This trade of Christian Ethiopian slaves persisted well into the 19th century, as they were preferred in Muslim markets over their neighboring pagan counterparts. Origin of the Bantu slave trade. The Bantu peoples are an indigenous ethno-linguistic grouping of approximately 400 distinct native African ethnic groups who speak Bantu languages. The languages are native to countries spread over a vast area from West Africa to Central Africa, Southeast Africa, and into Southern Africa. Bantu people also inhabit southern areas of Northeast African states. There are several hundred Bantu languages. Depending on the definition of language or dialect, it is estimated that there are between 440 and 680 distinct languages. The total number of speakers is in the hundreds of millions, ranging at roughly 350 million in the mid-2010s, roughly 30% of the population of Africa, or roughly 5% of the total world population. About 90 million speakers, 2015, divided into some 400 ethnic or tribal groups, are found in the Democratic Republic of the Congo alone. The larger of the individual Bantu groups have populations of several million, e.g. the Baganda people of Uganda, 5.5 million as of 2014, the Shona of Zimbabwe, 17.6 million as of 2020, the Zulu of South Africa, 14.2 million as of 2016, the Luba of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, 28.8 million as of 2010, the Sukuma of Tanzania, 10.2 million as of 2016, the Kikuyu of Kenya, 8.1 million as of 2019, the Xhosa people of Southern Africa, 9.6 million as of 2011, Botswana of Southern Africa, 8.2 million as of 2020, and the Pidi of South Africa, 7 million as of 2018. The Bantu expansion was a major series of migrations of the original Proto-Bantu speaking group, which spread from an original nucleus around West Central Africa across Central Africa, Eastern Africa, and Southern Africa. In the process, the Proto-Bantu speaking settlers absorbed, displaced, and possibly in some cases replaced pre-existing hunter-gatherer and pastoralist groups that they encountered. There is linguistic evidence for this expansion. A great many of the languages which are spoken across sub-equatorial Africa are remarkably similar to each other, suggesting a recent common cultural origin of their original speakers. The linguistic core of the Bantu languages, which constitute a branch of the Atlantic Congo language family, was located in the southern regions of Cameroon. Genetic evidence also indicates that there was a large human migration from Central Africa with varying levels of admixture with local population. The expansion is believed to have taken place between about 6,000 and 2,500 years ago, approximately 4,000 BCE to 500 CE. Linguistic analysis suggests that the expansion proceeded in two directions. The first, termed the Western Stream, proceeded south, either along the Atlantic coast or following rivers through the Congo rainforest, reaching central Angola around 500 BCE. The second, termed the Eastern Stream, proceeded east, either along the northern fringe of the forest or along the Ubangi River, and reached west of Lake Victoria around 500 BCE. From there, they split into two groups, with one heading west to regroup with the Western Stream, and the other dispersing over eastern and southern Africa. The expansion reached South Africa probably as early as 300 CE. 2,500 years ago, speakers of the original Proto-Bantu language group began a millennia-long series of migrations eastward from their original homeland in the general Cameroon area of Central Africa. This Bantu expansion first introduced Bantu peoples to southern and southeastern Africa. To satisfy the demands of the market for agricultural produce in the Arabian Peninsula and cater to the local needs, Somali clans in the lower Shabelle region and along the ancient Banadir coast began the procurement of Bantu slaves from Arab slave traders to provide labor and serve as client farmers for the Somali clans. The farming was performed by local client farmers, Boon, or low-status groups of the dominant Bimal, Geledle, Hintire, Mirosade, Mobiline, and other predominantly pastoral clans which had established control of small portions of the valley. They are produced mainly to serve local markets. Ample fertile land remained uncultivated due to a chronic shortage of farm labor. In order to respond to market demands for grain in South Arabia, the local Somali clans of the lower Shabelle began purchasing slaves from Arab and Swahili slave ships. These slaves came first from Zanzibar, the Zegwa or Mushunguli people. The Bantus residing in Somalia are the descendants of Bantu individuals who were taken captive and transported to Somalia by Arab slave merchants during the 18th and 19th centuries to work as agricultural laborers. The Somali Bantus belong to several ethnic groups, namely Majindo, Manyasa, Makua, Mzihua, Mushunguli, and Molima, each consisting of numerous subclans. Their ancestral roots can be traced back to various historical and modern African nations, including many in Central Africa, those of the Congo region, such as the then Kingdom of Congo, modern Angola, DR Congo and Rotsi, Mozambique, Malawi, and Tanzania. Bantus are ethnically, physically, and culturally distinct from Somalis and Ethiopians, and they have remained marginalized ever since their arrival to the Horn of Africa. All in all, the number of Bantu inhabitants in Somalia before the Civil War is thought to have been about 80,000, 1970 estimate, with most concentrated between the Juba and Shabelle rivers in the south. Recent estimates place the figure as high as 900,000 people. However, lower estimates place the figure between 500,000 and 600,000. East African slave trade. The Indian Ocean slave trade was multi-directional and changed over time. To meet the demand for menial labor, Bantu slaves were captured from southeastern Africa and sold in cumulatively large quantities over the centuries to customers in Egypt, Arabia, Somalia, Persia, India, the Far East, and the Indian Ocean islands. From 1800 to 1890, between 25,000 and 50,000 Bantu slaves are thought to have been sold from the slave markets of Zanzibar alone to the Somali coast by Somali slave traders. Most of the slaves were from the Makua, Nyasa, Yao, Zaramo, and Zigwa ethnic groups of Tanzania, Mozambique, and Malawi. Collectively, these Bantu groups are known as Mushunguli, which is a term taken from Menzigula, the Zigwa tribe's word for people. The word holds multiple implied meanings, including worker, foreigner, and servant. The Indian Ocean slave trade, sometimes known as the East African slave trade, involved the capture and transportation of predominantly sub-Saharan African slaves along the coasts. such as the Swahili coast and the Horn of Africa, and through the Indian Ocean. Affected areas included East Africa, southern Arabia, the west coast of India, Indian Ocean islands, including Madagascar, and Southeast Asia, including Java. The source of slaves was primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, but also included North Africa and the Middle East, Indian Ocean islands, as well as South Asia. While the slave trade in the Indian Ocean started 4,000 years ago, it expanded significantly in late antiquity, 1st century CE, with the rise of Byzantine and Sassanid trading enterprises. Muslim slave trading started in the 7th century, with the volume of trade fluctuating with the rise and fall of local powers. Beginning in the 16th century, slaves were traded to the Americas, including Caribbean colonies, as Northern, Western, and Southern European powers became involved in the slave trade. Trade declined with the abolition of slavery in the 19th century. Ancient Indian Ocean slave trade. Slave trading in the Indian Ocean goes back to 2500 BCE. Ancient Babylonians, Egyptians, Greeks, Indians, and Persians all traded slaves on a small scale across the Indian Ocean, and sometimes the Red Sea. Slave trading in the Red Sea around the time of Alexander the Great is described by Agatharchides. Strabo's Geographica, completed after 23 CE, mentions Greeks from Egypt trading slaves at the port of Adulis and other ports in the Horn of Africa. Pliny the Elder's Natural History, published in 77 CE, also describes Indian Ocean slave trading, ancient Indian Ocean slave trade. In the 1st century CE, Periplus of the Erythraean Sea advised of slave trading opportunities in the region, particularly in the trading of beautiful girls for concubinage. According to this manual, slaves were exported from Omana, likely near modern-day Oman, and Canay to the west coast of India. The ancient Indian Ocean slave trade was enabled by building ships capable of carrying large numbers of human beings in the Persian Gulf using wood imported from India. These shipbuilding activities go back to Babylonian and Achaemenid times. Gujarati merchants evolved into the first explorers of the Indian Ocean as they traded slaves and African goods such as ivory and tortoise shells. The Gujaratis participated in the slavery business in Mombasa, Zanzibar, and to some extent in the southern African region. Indonesians were also participants and brought spices to trade in Africa. They would have returned via India and Sri Lanka with ivory, iron, skins, and slaves, the main slave routes in medieval Africa, after the Byzantine and Sasanian empires. Entered into slave trading in the 6th century AD, it became a major enterprise. Cosmas Indicopleustes wrote in his Christian topography, 550 CE, that Somali port cities were exporting slaves captured in the interior to Byzantine Egypt via the Red Sea. He also mentioned the import of eunuchs by the Byzantines from Mesopotamia and India. After the 1st century, the export of black Africans from Tanzania, Mozambique, and other Bantu groups became a constant factor. Under the Sasanians, Indian Ocean trade supported not only the transport of slaves, but also of scholars and merchants. Muslim Indian Ocean slave trade. The Muslim world expanded along trade routes, such as the Silk Route in the 8th century. As the power and size of the Muslim trading networks grew, merchants along the routes were motivated to convert to Islam, as this would grant them access to contacts, trade routes, and favor regarding trading rules under Muslim governance. By the 11th century, Kilwa, on the coast of modern-day Tanzania, had become a fully fledged affluent center of a Muslim-governed trade in slaves and gold. Exports of slaves to the Muslim world from the Indian Ocean began after Muslim, Arab, and Swahili traders won control of the Swahili coast, and sea routes during the 9th century, see Sultanate of Zanzibar. These traders captured Bantu peoples, Zanj, from the interior in the present-day lands of Kenya, Mozambique, and Tanzania, and brought them to the coast. There, the slaves gradually assimilated in the rural areas, particularly on the Unguja and Pemba Islands. Muslim Merchants traded an estimated 1,000 African slaves annually between 800 and 1700, a number that grew to see 4,000 during the 18th century and 3,700 during the period 1800-1870. William Gervais Clarence Smith writes that estimating the number of slaves traded has been controversial in the academic world, especially when it comes to the slave trade in the areas of the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea. When estimating the number of people enslaved from East Africa, author N.D.I. and French historian Olivier Pétré-Grenouillot estimate 8 million as the total number of people transported from the 7th century until 1920, amounting to an average of 5,700 people per year. Many of these slaves were transported by the Indian Ocean and Red Sea via Zanzibar. This compares with their estimate of 9 million people enslaved and transported via the Sahara. The captives were sold throughout the Middle East and East Africa. This trade accelerated as higher capacity ships led to more trade and greater demand for labor on plantations in the region. Eventually, tens of thousands of captives were being taken every year. Slave labor in East Africa was drawn from the Zanj, Bantu peoples that lived along the East African coast. The Zanj were for centuries shipped as slaves by Muslim traders to all the countries bordering the Indian Ocean. The Umayyad and Abbasid caliphs recruited many Zanj slaves as soldiers, and as early as 696, there were revolts of Zanj slave soldiers in Iraq. A 7th century Chinese text mentions ambassadors from Java presenting the Chinese emperor with 2 Sengqi, Zanji slaves, as gifts in 614. 8th and 9th century chronicles mention Sengqi slaves reaching China from the Hindu kingdom of Srivijaya in Java. The 12th century Arab geographer Al-Idrisi recorded that the ruler of the Persian island of Kish raids the Zanj country with his ships and takes many captives. According to the 14th century Berber explorer Ibn Battuta, the sultans of the Kilwa Sultanate would frequently raid the areas around what is today Tanzania for slaves. The Zanj Rebellion, a series of uprisings that took place between 869 and 883 AD near the city of Basra, also known as Basara, situated in present-day Iraq, is believed to have involved enslaved Zanj, who had originally been captured from the African Great Lakes region and areas further south in East Africa. The rebellion grew to involve more than 500,000 slaves and free men who had been imported from across the Muslim Empire and claimed tens of thousands of lives in lower Iraq. The Zanj, who were taken as slaves to the Middle East, were often used in strenuous agricultural work. As the plantation economy boomed and the Arabs became richer, they began to consider agriculture and other manual labor work as demeaning. The resulting labor shortage resulted in an increased slave market. It is certain that large numbers of slaves were exported from Eastern Africa. The best evidence for this is the magnitude of the Zanj revolt in Iraq in the 9th century, though not all of the slaves involved were Zanj. There is little evidence of what part of Eastern Africa the Zanj came from, for the name is evidently used here in its general sense, rather than to designate the particular stretch of the coast from about 3 degrees Cairn to 5 degrees, to which the name was also applied. Zanzibar and expansion of slave trade in the Swahili coast. The East African slave trade flourished greatly from the second half of the 19th century, when Said bin Sultan, an Oman sultan, made Zanzibar his capital and expanded international commercial activities and plantation economy in cloves and coconuts. During this period, demands for slaves grew drastically. The slaves were needed for local use mainly to work in plantations in Zanzibar and for export. Sultan Sayyid is an Arabic title for lord. Sayyid made deliberate efforts to revive old Arab caravan trade with mainland Africa, which became the major source of slaves. Said bin Sultan took 6 major initiatives which facilitated growth and expansion of his commercial empire. He firstly introduced a new currency, Maria Theresa dollar, to supplement the existing Spanish crown, which simplified commercial activities. Secondly, He introduced a harmonized 5% import duty for any merchandise entering into his empire. He abolished export duties. Thirdly, he took advantage of Zanzibar's and Pemba's fertile soil to establish plantations of coconut and cloves. Fourthly, he revitalized and extended the old Arab caravan trade with mainland East Africa to acquire slaves and ivory. He signed commercial treaties with Western capitalist countries, such as the United States of America in 1833, with Great Britain in 1839, and France in 1844. Finally, he invited Asian merchants and experts who dealt with financial matters. It was not until 1873 that Sultan Sayyid Bargash of Zanzibar, under pressure from Great Britain, signed a treaty that made the slave trade in his territories illegal. The British played a significant role in ending slavery in East Africa. They made treaties with African rulers to stop the slave trade at its source and offered protection against slave kingdoms like Ashanti. The Royal Navy was instrumental in capturing slave ships and freeing enslaved Africans. Between 1808 and 1860, around 1,600 slave ships were captured, and more than 150,000 enslaved Africans were freed. Britain also made suppressing the Atlantic slave trade a part of its foreign policy. Arab Muslim traders also trafficked Malagasy and Comorian slaves from Madagascar and the Comorian archipelago to ports on the Red Sea, Persian Gulf, Swahili Coast, Zanzibar, and the Horn of Africa. From 700 AD to 1600 AD, an estimated 2,000 to 3,000 East African and Malagasy slaves were trafficked annually from the Indian Ocean coast to slave ports along the Red Sea and southern Arabia. By the mid-1600s, this number had increased to 5,000 to 6,000.